So, where the hell is Savannah Guthrie's mom? Nancy Guthrie, the 84-year-old mother of Today Show host Savannah Guthrie, was last seen when her family dropped her off at her home in Arizona on the night of January 31st, 2026. By the following morning, she was gone. Concern quickly grew when she failed to show up for church on Sunday morning, something her friends described as highly out of character, prompting them to contact her family. Inside her home, her car, phone, and daily medication were all left behind, a detail investigators described as especially alarming, considering her limited mobility and reliance on those medications. Police stated she had no history of wandering, confusion, or cognitive decline, making it highly unlikely she would have left on her own, especially at night. Despite the apparent urgency of the situation, there were no publicly reported signs of forced entry or a struggle, only deepening the unease surrounding how she disappeared without a trace. Investigators later described the scene inside the home as very concerning, saying they believe she didn't leave voluntarily and that the case should be treated as a potential crime. Authorities have since collected DNA evidence, involved multiple agencies, and are reviewing tips and nearby surveillance footage, but as of now, no suspect or confirmed lead has been announced. Here's a police sketch that was released during the investigation into the disappearance of 3-year-old Madeline McCann, a case that remains unsolved nearly 2 decades later. In 2007, Madeline vanished from a holiday apartment in Praia da Luz, Portugal, while her parents were dining nearby. She'd been left asleep with her younger siblings, and when her mother went to check on the children later that night, Madeline's bed was empty and the bedroom window was open. As the investigation dragged on, police issued multiple suspect sketches based on eyewitness accounts, including one female person of interest that later drew widespread attention due to its striking resemblance to Ghislaine Maxwell, the British former socialite who was convicted in 2021 of trafficking girls for Jeffrey Epstein. Despite one of the largest missing child investigations in European history, no definitive trace of Madeline has ever been found, as her fate remains unknown. Dan Burroughs was a high-ranking white supremacist in the 1960s, serving as the third highest member of the American Nazi Party and a Grand Dragon of the New York KKK. But in 1965, the New York Times revealed that Burroughs was actually Jewish, raised in a Jewish family, attended Hebrew school, and even had a bar mitzvah. Hours after the article was published, Burroughs took his own life, and the organizations he led immediately disavowed him as the revelation became public. This is the face of 87-year-old World War II veteran and daylily horticulturist Leo Sharp, who was pulled over in Michigan in 2011 after appearing confused and disoriented. A search of his vehicle uncovered more than 400 pounds of cocaine, revealing that he'd secretly spent years working as a high-level courier for Mexico's Sinaloa cartel. Because he looked so harmless and was rarely questioned, Sharp transported massive quantities of cocaine across the U.S. before being caught. He later pleaded guilty to drug trafficking charges and was sentenced to prison in his late 80s, becoming one of the oldest cartel mules ever prosecuted. In 1951, the French town of Pont-Saint-Esprit was hit by a sudden outbreak of severe illness after residents ate bread from a local bakery. Around 250 people experienced intense hallucinations, convulsions, and severe paranoia, with some reporting visions of snakes crawling out of their bodies or being consumed by flames. Several victims jumped from windows or ran screaming through the streets, while others were restrained or sedated as hospitals quickly filled beyond capacity. At least 5 people died and dozens were committed to psychiatric institutions. Investigators later concluded the outbreak was most likely caused by ergot poisoning, a toxic fungus that can contaminate rye and produce effects similar to LSD, which many historians have also theorized may have contributed to the Salem witch trials. Here's a photo of a young American soldier who would become the face of one of the darkest scandals of the Iraq War. Sabrina Harmon was a 26-year-old U.S. Army reservist stationed at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq in 2003, where she became involved in a massive abuse scandal after photographs surfaced showing prisoners being humiliated, tortured, and posed like trophies. In the most infamous image, Harmon is seen smiling and giving a thumbs up while standing next to the dead body of an Iraqi detainee named Monadel al-Jamadi, who had died in agony during a CIA interrogation after being suspended from the ceiling by his wrists. Other photos of her showed naked prisoners stacked in pyramids, forced to simulate sex acts, threatened with dogs, and terrorized while hooded and restrained. Many of the prisoners photographed were never charged with any crime. Some were held solely because they were picked up during raids or turned in by rivals for bounties. Harmon later admitted she took dozens of photos and wrote home that the abuse was a joke and that watching prisoners suffer and die was, quote, pretty funny. She was convicted in 2005 of conspiracy, dereliction of duty, and maltreatment, and sentenced to 6 months in military prison, a dishonorable discharge, and loss of rank. The images shocked the world and became some of the most infamous symbols of U.S. war crimes in Iraq. Here's a photo of American soldier Joseph Dwyer carrying a wounded Iraqi boy away from crossfire during the Iraq War in 2003, an image that became a symbol of compassion amid chaos. After returning home, Dwyer was diagnosed with severe PTSD, became unemployed, and suffered a marital breakdown as his mental health deteriorated into paranoia and violent delusions. In 2008, after years of psychological struggle and substance abuse, Joseph Dwyer died from a drug overdose, a quiet end to a life permanently altered by the horrors of war. In 2025, 15-year-old woodworking apprentice Muhammad Kandirsi died after coworkers assaulted him with a high-pressure air hose during what they reportedly called a workplace prank. The force of the compressed air caused massive internal damage, including rupturing of his intestines and severe internal bleeding. Doctors said the sudden air pressure led to rapid organ failure and shock, and despite emergency treatment, his injuries were too extensive for him to be saved. Authorities treated the incident as a violent assault, and the case sparked massive outrage over deadly hazing and abuse in the workplace. Tara Calico was a 19-year-old University of New Mexico student who disappeared on September 20th, 1988 while riding her bike near her home in Belen, New Mexico. She never returned, and no physical evidence of her fate was ever found. 3 months after she went missing, a Polaroid was discovered in a Florida parking lot, showing a young woman and a boy bound and gagged inside a van. Tara's family believed the woman closely resembled her, noting similar facial features and a scar consistent with Tara's medical history. But the photo was never definitively identified or traced to its source. Tara Calico was never found, the boy in the photo was never identified, and no arrests were ever made. In 2023, Delbert Cornish shot and killed his 18-year-old daughter, Hope Onyx Cornish, inside their home in Caldwell, Idaho. After killing her, he also shot and killed her pet cat. Cornish later admitted to the killings, telling police, "My kids died by my hand." At the time of her death, Hope had reportedly been turning her life around. Family members said she'd been sober for more than a year, was working, and had recently started building more stability in her life. But despite this, Cornish told investigators he killed her and her cat because he was, quote, tired of them being made fun of. Authorities found no evidence of provocation or self-defense and said the killing was deliberate. Cornish later pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. This is why you should never let anyone kiss your baby. Or just don't kiss someone else's baby. A 2-year-old boy from England recently lost vision in his left eye after someone with an active cold sore kissed him, transferring the herpes simplex virus directly into his eye. The infection caused a blister to form on his cornea that quickly turned into a 4mm wide open wound, leading to repeated infections and permanent nerve damage. Doctors said the virus destroyed the feeling in that eye, and the brain eventually stopped sending signals to it, leaving him completely blind on that side. His parents tested negative for herpes, so doctors believe an acquaintance unknowingly passed the virus through a kiss. Despite weeks of treatment, the damage was irreversible, and doctors were later forced to sew his eyelid shut to protect what remained of that eye. In June of 2004, an 8-year-old girl slipped into the active pool at the Fort Worth Water Gardens, a fountain system powered by strong underground pumps that created a hidden undertow. When her father and 2 brothers jumped in to save her, they were immediately dragged under by the suction and drowned. A 4th bystander who tried to help was also pulled in and killed. None of them realized the pool contained currents strong enough to trap adults underwater, and by the time the pumps were shut off, all 4 rescuers were already dead. In 2022, DMV rapper Markel Moro, aka Gunu, was shot and killed in Washington, D.C. Days later, his family held a memorial inside a D.C. nightclub where his embalmed body was dressed in designer clothes, propped upright on stage, and displayed while his music played to a crowd. The invite-only event was attended by family, friends, and fans, turning a nightclub into a viewing space and leaving people standing feet away from his real corpse. There's no evidence Gunu ever requested this, making it one of the strangest memorials ever held for a deceased rapper. A baby named Breland was born completely healthy, but just 2 days after birth, she was kissed on the mouth by someone with an active cold sore. Because her immune system was not yet developed, she contracted herpes simplex virus, which spread to her brain and caused HSV encephalitis. The infection led to seizures and permanent brain damage, another case demonstrating why you should be very careful when kissing a baby. In 1925, Ora Ralph Thomas, an Illinois sheriff's deputy during the Prohibition era, was assassinated by members of the KKK. Thomas was the leader of an armed anti-Klan paramilitary group, making him a direct target. When 3 Klansmen ambushed him, Thomas returned fire, shooting and killing all 3 of his attackers before succumbing to his own wounds. Renowned actress Natalie Wood died in November of 1981 at age 43 after drowning off the coast of California during a weekend boat trip with her husband Robert Wagner and co-star Christopher Walken. She had gone missing from their yacht Splendor sometime during the night and was later found floating in the water wearing a nightgown, socks, and a down down jacket. The initial investigation ruled her death an accidental drowning, suggesting she had slipped while trying to secure a loose dinghy, despite Wood's well-known fear of dark water and inability to swim. An autopsy revealed bruises on her body in the presence of alcohol and pain medication, raising questions about whether she was impaired or injured before entering the water. Conflicting accounts from Wagner and Walken, reports of a heated argument earlier that night, and later statements from the boat's captain alleging Wagner delayed calling for help fueled decades of suspicion. 30 years later, in 2011, authorities officially reopened the case, and in 2012, Wood's death certificate was amended to drowning and other undetermined factors. In 2018, Wagner was named a person of interest, though no official charges have ever been filed, leaving one of Hollywood's most infamous deaths officially unresolved. This was the moment a 7-Eleven was destroyed during a brazen Christmas Eve ATM theft in Texas. In the early morning hours of December 24, 2025, surveillance footage from a 7-Eleven near Fort Worth shows two suspects smashing through the front of the store, attaching a cable to the ATM and using a stolen SUV to violently rip the machine through the building. After destroying half the store, the suspects fled, abandoning the ATM and SUV nearby and still remain unidentified. There's a tree in Pakistan that's been chained and officially arrested since 1898. This happened when a drunk British officer thought the tree was moving towards him and ordered one of his men to arrest it. 3 Nigerian men were arrested at Oran International Airport in Algeria after trying to fly to Dubai disguised as Arab women. Wrapped in hijabs, niqabs, and heavy makeup, they tried to slip through security, but officers noticed their documents didn't match and spotted stubble beneath the veils. A quick secondary check exposed the trio immediately, and they were taken into custody on the spot. This little girl was diagnosed with dementia before she even turned 4. When Sophia Scott was 3 years old, her parents noticed her speaking and development were going backwards. The day before her 4th birthday, doctors told her family she had Sanfilippo syndrome, a rare genetic disease that prevents the body from breaking down certain sugars, causing them to build up in the brain and slowly destroy the nervous system. They were told there was no treatment and that she was unlikely to survive past her teenage years. Sophia developed mostly normally at first, but around age 6 she began to decline. Over time, she lost her speech, memory, and her ability to walk and care for herself. She later developed seizures, sleep apnea, scoliosis, bowel problems, and more than 30 different symptoms. Sanfilippo syndrome is often called childhood Alzheimer's, and most children begin showing symptoms between ages 1 and 4, usually dying in their teens. Now 15 years old, Sophia has lost much of her abilities. Her family continues searching for experimental treatment, but doctors believe it may be too late to reverse the damage. In the final stages of this disease, the brain forgets how to control basic functions like swallowing and breathing, and most patients die from complications such as pneumonia, respiratory failure, or cardiac arrest. Here's an insane compilation of hospital patients playing instruments while surgeons operate directly on their brains. During certain brain surgeries, called awake craniotomies, patients are kept fully conscious while doctors remove tumors or treat severe epilepsy. The brain itself cannot feel pain, so surgeons can safely work while the patient is awake. Patients are asked to talk, sing, or play instruments during the operation, so doctors can map exactly which parts of the brain control speech, movement, and music. If the patient suddenly loses coordination or stops playing correctly, surgeons immediately know they're too close to an important area. In some cases, patients can hear the drilling and feel pressure but experience no pain. Some even have full conversations with the surgical team while their brain is exposed. This insane process allows doctors to remove as much of the tumor as possible while avoiding permanent damage to speech, memory, or motor function. So while it looks unreal, these patients are actually helping to guide their own brain surgery in real time. At the height of her Disney fame, Ashley Tisdale was battling serious health and mental struggles. Since childhood, she had suffered from severe anxiety and panic attacks, and during her High School Musical years, they became so intense that she was repeatedly rushed to hospitals believing she was having heart attacks until doctors realized it was panic. The stress left her barely eating and constantly exhausted. In 2007, at 21 years old, months of unexplained pain led doctors to discover a tumor in her breast that required surgery, later confirmed to be benign. Years later, she revealed she developed alopecia, causing patches of her hair to fall out from stress and autoimmune issues, saying the pressure to appear fine through the years came at a real cost to her health. In January of 2026 in Pennsylvania, 11-year-old Clayton Dietz fatally shot his adoptive father, Douglas Dietz, on the night of the boy's own birthday after his Nintendo Switch was taken away from him. Police say the child waited until his father fell asleep on the couch, found the key to his gun safe, loaded a handgun, and shot him once in the head. The boy later admitted he did it out of anger over losing his game console. Douglas Dietz died at the scene, while prosecutors charged the boy with criminal homicide and moved to try him as an adult, calling the case one of the most disturbing juvenile killings in recent years.